today we're very fortunate to have Genevieve from IBM, Lenovo, with us today. I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with her last week, and I was pretty fascinated. So I will just give you a bit of an appetizer, and then we'll hear from her. So she's an American. She has spent most of her adult life in Asia. And when I was chatting with her, I felt she's more Asian than me. And so she was sharing tales of her time in Vietnam when she was first starting out in her corporate comms career. And then she's been based in Hong Kong. I was wondering, Jen, whether you could introduce yourself, share with us your background, and I also was wondering whether you could share a bit of the nugget, that you shared with me when we earlier spoke, of how Hong Kong and Singapore are the sort of the landing point of most who start off in Asia, particularly in the pre-2000s. Yeah.
No, I think you're referring to the fact that when I first moved to Asia, I did, my first landing spot was in Hanoi. And you're right, I'm an American by birth, but that was back in 1994 was when the American embargo on Vietnam was first lifted. So like a lot of young people, I thought it to be exciting to go to those places which had previously been forbidden. And it was very exotic, and I wasn't allowed to go. In 1994, I was allowed to go, and that was the great early moment of landing there. But at the time, I was also a neophyte in public relations and communications. I first joined a local agency there, and later on, a Vietnamese business partner and I took that agency independent. And so I was there until the early 2000s before I moved to Hong Kong. And something that we discussed earlier is when I was in Vietnam, that level of professional communications was just beginning. In fact, the whole field was almost unknown. And where we really saw the professionalism was I had a lot of clients in Singapore and in Hong Kong, and to a certain extent in Malaysia as well. But Hong Kong and Singapore were where it was really being done right. And so that was the dream that I aspired to move upwards into a regional role. And so lucky enough, after some time, here I am in Hong Kong, also playing an Asia Pacific role.
Yes, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. What we also discovered during our conversation is that our time, had overlapped because I one of my early stints was also in Vietnam, and I was based in Saigon. So we were sort of exchanging tales about the correspondent life that many foreign journalists had, PR communicators who set up base, which she was sharing. So I'm wondering now whether you would mind sharing with us what's the brand purpose of your organization, and how do you see it fitting in the world today?
So first of all, just to make sure everyone knows who Lenovo is, I thought it was a little bit of a telling remark. You mentioned IBM at the beginning, and in fact, Lenovo was created in its modern form, created in 2005 when a Chinese company, Legend, I would say merged with the IBM PC business from the United States, and so that was where the modern Lenovo was born. And it's listed on the stock exchange in Hong Kong. Very global business now. I think we're, by last count, it goes up and down, but by last count, I think we're still the largest maker of PCs in the world, produce about 4 PCs every second. And I think a lot of you may, since you're online now, you may be using a Lenovo device to access this webinar. And the interesting thing, though, about the development of a company, right, is it goes through a certain period where you start to look for what is your purpose. It's not just well, of course, yes, you want to sell a lot of computers, but why? So it's not just how or what or how many, but why. And that's where in the middle of 2019, Lenovo for the first time articulated its corporate purpose, which I very conveniently have on my background, my virtual background, which is smarter technology for all. And that's a little bit of an advertising slogan for sure, but it is also something with a meaning behind it. The creation of or the articulation of a corporate purpose is about why do you want to do this? Why does it matter whether someone has technology? And I think in the last year, last 12 months, we've seen that more than ever before. The connectivity that it provides, the ability to in the middle of a pandemic, that we still are able to connect like this, the access that it gives to people from around the world, and the performance, this is making a big difference to people in all sorts of fields, whether it's education would be a big one, whether it's manufacturing, healthcare. You look at do you want to protect people as they're going through through their day, even if they are not able to work from home? Then you probably need Internet of Things enabled devices in your production site. And this is making this purpose of why is not just okay, we do our business and then on the side we do some CSR things. No, this is central to the business. This is the why of what we are attempting to do. So that, of course, it also makes it central to the communications of what we're talking about at any given moment as well.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I was wondering also whether, I threw in the IBM, so that you have a segue to share a little bit more. I was fascinated by how you described, the organization's inception, and you mentioned a little bit about how the identity, the tagline, and all that came kind of a little after, which is quite different from most institutions out there. I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about the disruptions that we have been facing in the technological sphere. Do share the mind-blowing numbers that you positioned to me. Last week I was floored. So how has the disruption in communications and media impacted your work, your role, as well as Lenovo? And has that in any way impacted your brand stewardship?
So if we talk about the disruption of the past year, that's something that's affected everybody, whether it's media, whether it's communications, anyone else. In the larger sense, the technological change that has happened over the past 20 or 30 years has, of course, made a big difference to, I would say, every professional communicator in the world. Having said that, some fundamentals remain. I think even when I was in Vietnam and I was sending faxes to my journalists and going around on a motorcycle to hand the physical photos to the journalists, this is absolutely the same thing I'm doing now, but just in a different format. So are human beings interested in visuals? Are they interested in connecting with stories? Do they want to know why they should be interested in a topic? And these are fundamentals that don't change over years, I think, from when someone was writing stone tablets. And in the disruption of the past year during the pandemic, then we have, I would say, a big challenge for all of us in communicators in terms of format. Just to give you an example, internal communications. You can't put up a banner in the office if nobody's in the office. All you have is this one screen in front of you. That's the only channel you have. But to me, that just makes it even more important to have the purpose behind your communications. What are you talking about? Are you talking about something vague and corporate, or are you talking about a specific instance of a service or a product that is going to make a meaningful difference in somebody's life? Can you illustrate it correctly with an image? I'll give you an example. We launched, I think it was just last couple of weeks, a service which is the CO2 offset service. So this is something that if you think about like, why do I buy a PC? It's to connect, but how do I care about how that PC has come to be? Am I interested in the footprint that that PC has in its production? Then it's something you care about deeply. And even in the middle of a pandemic, the climate protection is still the vitally important for the long term of our future of our planet. So if we want to talk about something that's important to people, even in the middle of a pandemic, then you have to not say like, oh, this computer is so fast and it's so lightweight, and like, yes, it's the fastest and the lightweight computer, but why are you buying our brand rather than somebody else's? And that's because of this larger purpose in mind. So these are the types of disruptions we're talking about, both the long term and also the shorter. Well, it's feeling like a long-term disruption already from the the pandemic point of view.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's going too far away from where we are at this moment, but let's continue to be positive. I thought that at this juncture, perhaps we could answer a question that has come up from one of our attendees. And the question is this: is Hong Kong losing its spot as the region's favorite business hub in light of the recent spate of political crackdowns by the Chinese government? Will Lenovo consider moving its HQ to Singapore?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question, and something that is, I think, thrown into sharp relief during the past year of the pandemic, is the question of where are you based and how important is that? And I actually think that Lenovo is unique in the world, because even before the pandemic, we are kind of scattered everywhere. We are legally registered in Hong Kong as our corporate headquarters globally, because we're listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And our CFO lives and sits in Hong Kong. But our chief operating officer lives in Milan. Our chief legal officer lives in Washington, D.C. My corporate communications head lives in London. I have an Asia Pacific role. I happen to be sitting in Hong Kong, but my number two sits in Singapore. My peer is Japanese and lives in Australia, and my head of marketing is for Asia Pacific, lives in Bangalore. So this kind of distributed workforce is something that, if you are technology enabled, is something that's much more achievable now, I think, than ever before. And that to a certain extent, it makes a question of where are you headquartered? I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but it's a very different question when you don't have to all be physically in the same space. When we moved to working from home during the first part of the pandemic, to a certain extent we don't notice, because we were already always in these conference calls, and we were very familiar with using Microsoft Teams before I think before the mainstream. So that's something that I would see as if I come back to this question of purpose, what does technology enable? What does it contribute? Why are we doing this? It's so that companies can, I don't know if anybody will do it to the extent we do, because I think we're really committed to this distributed workforce thing, but it will enable companies or organizations to look for very different opportunities. And as communicators, let's come back to it, because we're all communications people. You think about, when do I need to tell my story and in what way? So we did a very nice event for the Consumer Electronics Show. So it's not our event, right? It's the Global Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, all virtual this year. And we were able to do some things with media that we couldn't have done before, inviting a much larger group to participate, because nobody had to worry about whether that guy was on the ground in Las Vegas or whether he was sitting in Milan. We were actually able to connect media to the real product experts who could explain, okay, we just launched a new pair of VR glasses that's very cool, by the way. It allows you to see all your screens in front of you in the air instead of having a bunch of monitors. Just product plug there for a second. But we were able to connect people to the person who was in charge of that product, connect the media to that person who's in charge of that product, in a way which we couldn't have done if they're sitting, if the journalists were not in Las Vegas before. And so this has, I think, very much changed the way we're all looking at how we do communications in the future, from a tactical point of view as well. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind if I would take a step back, because we talked a little bit about corporate purpose when we started out, and I also mentioned that the way we are doing communications, the articulation of our corporate purpose, has actually had a big impact because of the change in our business as well. Because every time we're talking about communications, we talk about how does it support the business. So if the business is meant to bring smarter technology for all, what does that mean in the middle of a pandemic? And what actually happened over the past year is that huge numbers of people started moving to online environments. They started moving to the cloud. They started working from home. They started doing, factory automation and control and monitoring. You can't go into the control room, so you have to use, VR headset, or you have to use augmented reality to look at things. This made a big difference to what was needed in the business, which was not just selling the boxes, not just selling the devices, but a whole service package and a consultancy service, advisory service, which, we've been selling that before, but this just took off during the last year. So what does that mean for communications? And it was a huge change for all of us, trying to educate an internal workforce about, Lenovo is selling services now, sometimes not even our own product, and bringing that message and understanding the employee's point of view from the internal communications first, before we can go out and go into the marketplace and say, like, we're ready to sell these services. So all of this is very interlinked. The external market, what's going on in the world, how the company is transforming, and then what does that mean to communications?
Okay, thank you. We have another question related to sustainability. So with Lenovo's asset recovery service, less than 2% of the material from old electronics will end up in landfill. Clearly, Lenovo is walking the talk and has been rather innovative in communicating its brand story in Asia Pacific. What are the new types of stories that tech companies need to tell to inspire employees and partners to embrace sustainability in the way Lenovo has?
Yeah, it's thanks for asking. Talking about the sustainability aspects, let's say specifically the environmental aspects of the business. This is something that it was kind of a difference for me from my last job before I joined Lenovo, because I was actually at a chemical company before, always also very focused on environmental topics, but it's a very different topic. So if you're in a chemical company, you tend to be worried about how the product itself is behaving in when it's being used. You tend to be worrying about chemical spills, things like that. In Lenovo, it's very different. So what is the CO2 produced by the product? Where does the product go after it leaves it leaves your factory, after it comes to its end of life at the business, at the consumer level? And so this comes back a little bit to what is this company doing? Is it selling boxes, or is it selling the complete solution life cycle? So what the question referred to, I think, is someone who knows Lenovo, is this something called asset recovery. So at the end of the life of the computer, what happens to it? Do you throw it in the junk pile? Do you throw it in the river? This is not a real background behind me, but you don't want it in the environment. So is there a way to recover that asset, cleanly get rid of the data, and then recycle all the parts? And so that's a service offered by Lenovo, asset recovery service. which is a little bit more difficult to explain from a communications point of view than just here's a very cool computer with a lot of, that's very fast and very lightweight, and you can play all your favorite games on it. So I think that if we come to, again, talking about corporate purpose, if we talk about the types of stories which are needed to explain or to illustrate a corporate purpose, they're actually a lot harder to tell. And so you need more effort, you need more time, and you need more thought behind it. So this is where the professional skill of the communicator is really needed. So that's good, right? Because it means people like us still have jobs.
Yes, for sure. So the audience, is definitely rolling it in. Here's another one. How do you decide that, yes, this is what I want my brand purpose to be? Wouldn't it be harder for larger companies?
If any of you have ever been through that process where you define your corporate mission, vision, values, corporate purpose, boy, does it take a long time. And yes, it is. The bigger you are, the more complex your business. I mean, Lenovo, to a certain extent, I think we still had it kind of easy because we're a technology company. Conglomerates who are in, shipping and property and retail and housing and technology and farming, I think that's really tough. That's really tough to define a single corporate purpose. But having said that, it is a worthwhile exercise, even if you never get to the final, the sort of so-called final corporate purpose, because it has your people at the top, number one, thinking about it and considering why they're doing what they're doing. Number two, you can use the process of coming up with the corporate purpose as an internal communications tool in itself. Yeah, for example, you can ask the employees, what do they think your corporate purpose is? And then number three, because, and this is very selfish, it gets the communications people into the door to talk to the senior management of the company, which I think is never a bad thing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it takes time. And if there are companies which will help you with this, which will charge you an arm and a leg to go through the process, and it's worth it though.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have some students out there in our audience, and we're wondering, would you have any advice for them? Based on our conversations with them, some of them are disillusioned with the current job climate, which has been quite impacted by the global pandemic. Do you have any advice for them?
I think it's not easy to be a student nowadays, especially if you're not able to have the real face-to-face contact with other students, with faculty. But please do not despair. I think there are a lot of opportunities out there still, and as students, there are a few things that I want to emphasize. Number one is that students have the perspective that people my age maybe lack. Yeah. So yes, I have teenage kids, but am I going to consult with them on a communications decision? So probably I would say that having the diversity of not only gender, not only race, but also age in the communications department is really important. So as a student who's just entering the job market, for example, I don't think there's any harm in bringing that expertise to the table. The other thing I would like to mention is that for communications, it is during difficult times that the boss starts to appreciate the communications person. So I think there's nothing like a crisis to make the boss realize, like, that's why he's paying your salary. He or she is paying your salary. And so sometimes this is a very strange time, of course, but the career opportunities in communications, I think, are actually going to get a bit wider and broader by the time we're coming out of the pandemic and things are picking up again. So I would be very surprised if we don't see a lot of opportunities, not only for old folks like Nisar and myself, but for young people as well.
Okay, thank you. We have about 3 minutes left, and 2 questions have just come in. How are you doing for time?
I'm fine for time, please.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's go through the questions. In your view, what are some of the new skills and expertise that a PR practitioner needs to acquire to stay relevant?
So the fundamentals are always important. Yeah. So this whole concept of before you do any kind of communications, you think about, ABC. Okay, these letters don't work, but the audience. Who's the audience? What are you talking about? And what is the channel? Audience, something message that starts with a B, and what is the channel? So the audience, the message, and the channel. I feel like if I could ask every single person who wants to do communications to consider those carefully before doing any kind of communications, then a lot of the job is done. Now, that's simple to explain, very difficult to put into practice. So when it comes down to it, the analysis of the audience is something I think is very, very much of interest to leaders right now. I think communications is getting more mathematical than it ever has before. So being able to say, yes, my audience is interested, 14% in this topic, and their sentiment is at, a 75% favorable, and they're 13% located in this location, and that means what? So the analysis and interpretation of the audience is absolutely important. So working with other groups like market intelligence, I think, are very important. In the second area, knowing your message, but being able to articulate it, very, very important. I find a lot of communications people still don't know how to write. And it amazes me, like, how is that possible in the year 2021? You have a communications person who doesn't think about the headline. And I think more than ever, right, for young people, for example, who are spending more time on ever on social media, shouldn't you be interested? Shouldn't you know what kind of posts catch your own attention? So being able to think about what is the topic and how do you write that headline, and how do you take that headline into a longer form, into a shorter form, and then we're getting into the channel. So understanding all the different channels available to you and what are the uses of each channel. This basic level of professionalism of audience analysis, writing and articulating messages, and understanding channels, I think will get you through a lot. So, and it's on that basis, and I think I mentioned this to you before, Nisar, that you get to do the fun stuff. So once you are firmly entrenched in being able to deliver at that level, then can you go back to your boss and say, hey, we're doing very well in all these basics. Here's an idea I'd like to talk about. And then that's, I think, where you can get to the next level and do the really creative stuff. You see, I didn't even talk about creativity until last, because you got to get the fundamentals right first.
Yes,
and especially if you're just entering the profession.
Yes, no, exactly. No. So we have it's 5:30 now, and if it's okay with you, we could ask you 2 questions.
Sure.
Before we end. Yep. Okay, so here's another question. Lenovo is still regarded as a Chinese company in some circles. Why are Chinese brands not so well regarded as they deserve to be in some markets? Has this made Lenovo consciously shed its Chinese identity?
Yes, this is a topic that does not only impact brands who are commonly associated with China, but I would say almost every market is, no matter what market you are perceived as being from, this will impact so the brand of a certain country will impact your overall brand. Yeah, that's just a fact of life. I still remember that the case of, I think it's McDonald's in France many years ago, was hiring French people, buying French products, raw materials, serving French customers, and paying French taxes. But when the moment came that there was anti-American feeling, unfortunately, McDonald's got a brick through the window by the local protesters. So this is national identity and brand identity are, it's very difficult to it's very difficult to say like, oh, I am or am not that brand. Now the fact of the matter is that Lenovo is a little bit unusual in that it has a strong heritage in China, but at the same time, it's, I think, unusually multinational. With like I mentioned before, with the board members sitting all over the world and coming from, I don't know, 5 different nationalities. So it is actually that is the thing which sometimes makes it difficult for us, because I think there's no one else like us. I really think the company is unique in the world. But no, we don't try to, hide or say, oh, no, we're not this or we're not that. Because I don't think, number one, I don't think it works. And number two, it's not helpful. So rather it's the grunt work of everyday communications, making sure that people understand facts, that your messages are right, that you've engaged with your audience, that you've made sure that you have all the channels in place, because otherwise what someone thinks or they heard about you from somewhere is always going to be stronger when they've really met you. I used to find this in my previous life in the chemical industry, is that the chemical industry itself had not have a great reputation, but the more people got to know my company, the more they liked us. And I think that's a very good thing. It's much better than the other way around, obviously. And I think that's true with Lenovo as well. Is the more they get to know the company, the more they see what's inside. And it's not just the cool technology, but a lot of other interesting things going on. Whether it's technology, assistive technologies for disabled people, or whether it's the kind of things I was mentioning earlier, educational solutions. This is very different from just saying like, oh, it's brand this country or that country.
So as a parting shot, we were wondering whether you could shed light on what you think the relevance of a convening body like IPRS. Although we are Singapore-based, in your global experience, what can we bring to the table, and how can we contribute to the PR profession?
Well, I'm a big fan of organizations like IPRS, and I got to know IPRS pretty early on, back when I was in Vietnam. I think it was the first time I heard of IPRS. And what I mentioned a little while ago, that establishing the skill base and establishing the professionalism to be taken seriously by management is, undeniably the most important thing that has to come before we start to talk about can you do creative or interesting projects. And so I think the organizations like IPRS who help to bring or create standards for that skill base and create a better understanding of the communications profession as a profession, as opposed to just like, oh yeah, I know how to communicate, I know how to talk, therefore I'm a communications person. Like, oh, I like public things, I like speaking in public, therefore I'm in public relations. So I think those things are something that an organization like IPRS absolutely must exist for our profession to help bring us to that next level.
Thank you. Your comment reminds me of a conference I attended, and it was a right thing, and a lot of the delegates were saying that our challenge is that everybody thinks they can write. So the conference speaker was saying that, everybody has a pen, that's why they think everybody can write. So with that,
I think my favorite quote was the most difficult thing about the biggest problem with communications is the illusion that it has happened.
Oh, thank you. So thank you so much for sparing your time on this Friday evening. A huge thank you to our guests and attendees who have joined us, and we hope you've enjoyed this dialogue and gotten to know Lenovo a little better, from the Hong Kong global perspective for our Singapore audience. Thank you so much.